All right, best of the year, two-part edition. And as voted by all of you, what is the most popular option out there? What you're picking up? What is it?
Unsurprisingly, it is the BRS two-part.
Yeah, this guy right here. That is the power of cheap. Yes. In this case, not cheap being like low quality, meaning this is pharmaceutical quality that is backed actually with all of the MS ICP testing that we've done on a variety of different options out there, showing it is definitively better as well. So the more, better, less value trifecta, not surprising. That's what you guys are picking up and making the king. In fact, if you stacked all the other stuff on top of itself, still not standing as tall or being used as heavily by you guys as the BRS bulk. In that spirit, best for entry-level reefers being a clean budget option. Clean meaning like I'm not buying this from a hardware store and DIYing it. I'm making sure that it is appropriate for the application, but I also want it cheap and easy. What is it?
It's going to be BRS again.
That feels awfully self-serving, but I guarantee, man, we're going to get beyond that. But there is a reason why so many people use it, and basically those are the reasons. It's cheap, it's easy, and it's amongst the highest quality option out there, if not the highest quality option of anything that we sell. All right, next, best for raising the pH of the tank. Low pH is a very, very, very common issue for a lot of people in our closed houses, lots of pets and people breathe in. So what is the best option for raising that amongst the two parts?
Basically anything that's made from soda ash. So this will be things like the BRS soda ash, the Red Sea, but the liquid products, not the dry products.
This is the dry one here. The dry one's actually based on like baking soda and sodium bicarbonate, so it doesn't raise the pH. The liquid one, however, is based on soda ash, I believe, and raises the pH, so a little bit different also.
Yeah. We've also got ESV, which is going to do it, and the Triton method also.
Yes, so all those options, and actually including the Brightwell option. So a lot of them out there will raise the pH. Some of them just a little bit more than the other ones, but most of them, they're either going to be baking soda based or sodium bicarbonate, or they're going to be soda ash, which is sodium carbonate based, and all of the sodium carbonate based will raise the pH of your tank, which most people find pretty desirable. All right, the flip side of that is true also. Sometimes you don't want the pH to change all that much. Maybe your pH is just fine, but also with the pH elevation ones based on soda ash, you often dose it really slow with a dosing pump, like drip, 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 or spread it out over the day, you know, even a little bit burst, but like lots of them throughout the day, because you don't want like a big giant impact to the pH or chemistry. But if I'm going to dose it by hand, which is I'm going to pour out 100 milliliters and dump it in, well, I don't want that poof, and I don't want all those other things. So probably in that case, no impact or minimal impact to pH is a better solution. And there are a bunch of options to do that, starting with the BRS bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate. So instead of using the soda ash, you swap out the recipe or pouch, in this case, the TerraStrip pouch, and use the option that is based on sodium bicarbonate or baking soda. In that case, you don't have a lot of pH and you just walk up and pour it in, but there are some other options.
Yeah, so we've got the same sort of deal with the Red Sea. That's going to have the same effect. Very low impact on pH.
Dry version again.
Dry version specifically.
I don't know why there's a difference, why they use different chemistry for the wet and the dry, but the dry version is minimal impact to the pH. Wet one does raise it.
Yeah, and then we've also got the Aqua Forest and the Tropic Marin. Mm-hmm. They're all based on the sodium bicarbonate, and they're going to have very little impact on the pH, so you don't have to worry about that white poof or changing the pH in the tank.
I'm not surprised that like some of the more mainstream options like Aqua Forest and the Tropic Balling, because historically, you know, dosing by hand was, and maybe is even, the most popular option, you know, because let's just call it what it is. It's just less expensive, right? I don't have to have a dosing pump for this. But as you get into this, I want to be able to go on vacations and maintain my chemistry. I want to be able to run out the door and not worry about it. I just want to know that it's done consistently every single day the same way. And that's why dosing pumps are so popular. And then on top of that, that I have the ability to raise the pH, win. But I'm not surprised that historically some of these like really popular options with the Red Sea dry, the Aqua Forest, and the Tropic Marin, all really minimal impact to the pH. All right, this one's interesting. A lot of people don't think about this, but you should, which is best for if you have a refugium. how are two parts in refugiums possibly mixed together? Why would it be best? Answer?
The answer is that the Triton Core 7 is the best option because along with the two-part that you're going to be dosing, your refugium is going to be sucking up a lot of other macro and micronutrients that your tank and corals require. So you can actually replenish those at the same time as your two-part by using something that's purpose-built for it.
Yeah, so the reality is most of these options on the table will in some way manage trace elements, meaning that like most of them are tied actually to the calcium and alkalinity uptake. So they have a rough idea of how much iron and manganese and molybdenum and stuff that is uptaken by the zooxanthellae to support energy for the coral so it can calcify. So these things are kind of tied together. If I add more calcium, I probably need these things as well, and over time they've perfected that. Okay, but what happens if I have a refugium? Because in a refugium, I'm going to uptake a bunch of molybdenum, iron, manganese, and a bunch of other stuff for photosynthesis within a plant that doesn't calcify. So it's no longer tied to each other anymore, right? And so in that case, like the zooxanthellae lives within the coral. It's a plant that requires all those things to produce energy and photosynthesis. If I suck it all up into the refugium, I'm going to take it away from the zooxanthellae, which in turn takes away from the coral. But if I acknowledge now, which is what the Core 7 does, is it acknowledges that there is a refugium in this tank and there is a different type of uptake, and we should change the formulation to match that, that is ideal. And so even though a refugium and like calcium uptake don't seem like they're linked, that they are actually linked to the photosynthetic elements, not calcium and alkalinity, but everything else. So if you have a refugium, my best bet would be the Core 7. We actually did an episode on this where you could like see the cost per like DKH or cost per calcium, because it's not just the cost on the label of all of these things. It's actually the cost of the application of it. And some of them were a lot cheaper than the other ones. And without going and seeing that episode, I can tell you that most of the time you could actually identify it just by one thing. What is it?
It's just a dry product. Basically what's going on is if you get the dry product, it's almost like a concentrated version where you have to bring your own RODI water to turn it into the additive you're going to be using. It's one extra step, but it saves so much money and it's so easy to do that it just ends up being the smartest way to do it in the long run. Especially a lot of reefers will start off hand dosing liquids, and the second they realize, wait a minute, I'm paying for a lot of water and weight, you'll switch over to dry, start mixing it up yourself, you'll save a lot of money, and it's just a super simple way to do it.
Was it BYORODI?
Yeah,
Yes.
BYORODI.
Yes. The reason for that is because it's just a lot simpler for the manufacturers to make. So, if they're just going to put soda ash in a box or a container and put some trace elements in there, this is a really simple process for them to do, right? They're not shipping around water. They don't have big, huge jugs. It's just way less expensive to produce that product, which on your end makes it a lot cheaper to buy. And so if you just looked at the gambit, and I can't even think of one that actually steps outside of this, if you see that it comes in a powder form, you can guarantee it's cheaper to use to the application, meaning how much DKH and how much calcium do I actually get for my money.
Yeah.
And so just look for that and decide for yourself, because you probably don't care if you're using 10 milliliters a day, but if you're using 100 or 200 milliliters a day, this might be one of the easiest ways to reduce the overall cost of maintaining a reef tank. All right, there's a flyer in here, which is some of these are just calcium and alkalinity, and some of them also have trace elements, and they cost a lot more once you mix in the trace elements.
Yeah, the cheapest options for you are going to be either the Brightwell Reef Code or ESV Bionic, which is one that's been around for as long as I've been reefing just about.
This one definitely predates me. I don't think this one does. But they are both really inexpensive and have trace elements mixed into them. And trace elements isn't like a thing I would chase like trying to get all that stuff perfect because you're going to go mad scientist on it.
Yeah.
But like the reality is the organisms do utilize these things, and if they're being consumed, it's because they're using them biologically, and there are benefits to replacing them, even if you can't identify exactly what it is. And if it's inexpensive and easy, man, we should do it. Okay, so just to give you an idea of why that matters is stuff like the Red Sea. It's just calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium, and then they sell 4 different trace element things, which is significantly more expensive because I now got 6 dosing pumps, or I'm dosing a lot of stuff by hand, but like these ones don't include it. But these ones do, which obviously makes it significantly less expensive. The same thing with the tropic marin. They have 3 parts, calcium, alkalinity, magnesium. Trace elements aren't part of the matrix. But what they do is offer you the A and K over there. So the A and K, you just pour it in there, and now the solution has the trace elements, and this is really inexpensive and still easy. And one of the reasons that they keep it off is because in the early stages of a tank, when you're dosing those trace elements, you probably are growing more algae than you're growing coral. And so maybe in the beginning, you don't actually want those trace elements to give the tank a good push, and then you start scaling it in, right? At least that's what they found. In our case with BRS 2-part, we found that, trace elements do go down, but water changes will inhibit that. And it'll take you a really, really long way, especially if you do, a series of large water changes like once a year, like, string 3 30% once together. But the reality is the chemistry of the BRS and the tropic marin are almost the same. The only difference is this is bicarb and this one is soda ash, so you get the elevation of the pH with this. And you can do the exact same thing, which is add these A and K to the BRS. They gave us the recipe. We worked together pretty well with them. And they gave us a recipe. So you can actually take your bulk 2-part and add trace elements as well. But think about it in terms of cost. It's all of this stuff together, not just the 2. And sometimes it's just a lot easier as well. I do this sometimes. I stole this one's thunder, which is what is the best DIY a trace element solution for bulk chems?
That's going to be Tropic Marin's A and K. So basically you have 2 camps of trace elements. You can't store them together. So you get them separately and then you can dose them to your tank.
Yeah, and you just actually put them right in there with your 2-part, actually.
That's the best.
Dump right in.
One in each.
And I say DIY, so I would say BRS bulk stuff is like, a really safe, easy to obtain DIY. But even, man, if you were like going and buying 50-pound bags of, appropriate level of material and really DIYing it, this is the easiest way to add trace elements to that DIY solution as well. All right, lowest cost if I want to automate it. You know what? It's all tied to the dosing pumps.
Yeah, so if you're using 2-part that has trace elements built in, for example, you have 2 dosing pumps. If you're using a system that splits everything up, like the Red Sea does, where you've got all your trace elements separate, now you're adding a dosing pump for each one of those elements. So you got to account for that if that's the route you want to go. And if you do, that's awesome. You have more control. But if you want to keep things simple and a little bit more cost effective, it can really help to just use a 2-part.
Yeah, it changes between all of them. So like the BRS 2-part, there's calcium and alkalinity, but there's also like a magnesium part. And it is best to have the magnesium separate. There's some chemistry reasons as to why. It produces a better result, it's more balanced, but I now need a 3rd dosing pump. But not really, because most people would only really need to correct magnesium like once a month. It doesn't have the same uptake to it. Maybe every 2 weeks, you just do it by hand. Do the test and really easy to do. It's that alkalinity and calcium on a daily basis that I really want to watch. So I could automate all 3, but I could also just do 2. The B-Ionic or the Reef code, you could just do 2. It's cheaper, of course, because you only need 2 dosing pumps. With the 4-part from the Triton Core 7, well, 2 of those parts are actually the same in there. You can actually mix the 2 alkalinity parts. That allows them to make the calcium more concentrated. And so you could actually go with 3 or 4. 4 is really easy because I don't have to do the math. I dose all 4 of them the same, right? Or I could double that one up, go 3, and just the alkalinity would be double the dose.
Yeah, basically.
A little bit of math, not that much. But definitely something though like the Red Sea, it's kind of cool that they have all the trace elements out there. It's kind of cool that the trace elements are broken up into, separate things. So you can't really test for a lot of this stuff without ICP, but there's leading indicators. So like in the iodine, they're going to test for iodine, but there's other things in there that are similar to iodine that are probably uptaken at a similar rate. So if I test that like precursor number, it'll tell me. But I do then now have 7 different parts. I have calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, and 4 different dosing or trace elements. It's not only more expensive, but obviously more stuff to monkey around with. So pick the one that speaks to you. Some are better than others, but they're also more expensive and harder to automate. All right, one of the things here is best for avoiding the salinity rise. Some of you know, some of you don't know, but when you add both these things, you eventually will raise the salinity because there's leftover chloride from the calcium chloride and there's leftover sodium from the sodium carbonate or bicarbonate. The sodium and chloride, they're left over, create sodium chloride, like basically table salt, and it will elevate over time in the tank. But there is a solution that accounts for that.
Yeah, and Tropic Marine does a really good job of this. So does the BRS hybrid version of the 2-part that includes the Tropic Marine A and K. And that is that they have the salt-free trace elements built into the system already so that you're not messing with your trace elements when you have to do those water changes to remove the extra salt or drop the salinity through dilution.
Okay, so this is a little nerdy, so come along for the ride. And to be honest, a really good water change schedule somewhat defeats this, but it also is the cause of this. So what's really happening here is we're adding that sodium chloride and eventually the salinity will rise. Well, the only real way to lower the salinity is take some stuff out,
Yes.
and then replace it with fresh water and the salinity will go down. Well, the problem is we're maintaining calcium and alkalinity perfect, right? But when we do that water change, we're also going to remove everything else.
Yes.
All of the other major, minor, and trace elements in there are going to go out when we scoop out the salt water, throw it down the drain, replace it with fresh water. Now we'll raise the calcium and alkalinity back up so it's stable, but all those other things stay down. So what Part C does here is basically if you took a salt mix and you took out the calcium and the alkalinity and all of the sodium chloride out of it, added it in here, I'm going to re-add all that stuff back in with Part C, so it's a really small amount of it. And that means that the chemistry won't get out of whack over time.
Yeah.
Now you might be saying to yourself, well, I've been using those other ones just fine. And probably it's true. And the reality is though, is the problems that this would create are not the kind of thing that you would notice in a month.
No.
It's probably not the kind of things you would even notice in 12 months. It's the imbalances that happen over the course of 24 months as small imperfections as to how we manage the chemistry start to build up on top of each other. And this is what the Bali method was all about. And when we talked to them, it was like one of the holdbacks on it is it's more expensive than some of the other options. And so the mix of that now is how do you mix the BRS bulk with the Part C, with the A and K, and then when you do all that, you actually have an inexpensive balling method that addresses the inevitable chemistry issues that everybody acknowledges is true, but not everybody solves. All right, Thomas, all that said, if you could only pick one, which one is it?
If I'm only picking one, I'm going to use Tropic Marine's balling method. I'm familiar with it. I've used it a bunch. And it just works for me. I like the theory behind it, but I would say the BRS hybrid is like an easy swap for me if I had to.
I would say that the Bali method was once king. I don't know why it got dethroned because the chemistry didn't change or the value didn't change. Maybe the packaging didn't change enough. I don't know. It should be one of the most popular options out there. But I actually have a favorite as well. And my favorite is if I'm going to run a refugium, I'm just going to embrace the fact that I'm sucking out all of those trace elements for photosynthesis with the Chaetomorpha. I'm going to go core 7. It isn't, that much more expensive than the other things like on a monthly basis, and I'm doing it right now, and I'm addressing known chemistry problems. It's not fake, it's legit, and everybody will say it. You won't always say that, hey, I identify the exact, reason why something's doing better with or without it, but I know that I'm not providing the biology right, and I'm going to do that both so that my filtration actually continues to work the way it needs to, and that I'm providing the elements that the zooxanthellae need to provide energy to the coral. Now, if I'm not going to run a refugium though, it's definitely going to be the bulk stuff, and it's going to be with the A and K mixed in. And I'm going to go middle of the road now, right? Which is the bulk stuff in a 5-gallon pail or in these 8-pound bags or 7-pound bags. You scoop it out, measure with a measuring cup, great. But, even easier is these little tear strips, So definitely These things are the best value. Like these things are the number one that you guys pick up by far, because no more measuring or anything. The only thing you do is do the tear strip and pour it in your jug, and you now have a 2-part, and you don't have to worry about that. If you want to add trace elements to the mix, you add a couple milliliters of that in there, and boom, you're done. So those two, refugium, core 7, non-refugium, bulk, plus A and K. We got best a 2-part down, but what about test kits? What about best RODI system? Like, there's all these stages. Why would you ever want one? All that stuff in our list right here, which is best of the year. You can find out what you guys use as well as us.